It's a story we've all seen play out, right? A ceasefire gets announced, you feel this flicker of hope, and then it all falls apart. This cycle of truces that just don't stick is a hallmark of so many modern conflicts. So today, we're going to dig into why that keeps happening and explore a really fascinating, ancient framework that might just hold the blueprint for a more lasting peace.
Okay, so to get our heads around this, let's zoom in on one of the most persistent and frankly heartbreaking examples. We're asking the question, why is it that ceasefires in the Gaza conflict so often fail to last? By using this as our case study, we can start to see a pattern that, you'll find, applies way more broadly.
All right, first things first, we need to really understand the problem we're looking at. The source material calls it a recurring cycle of fragile truces.
I mean, just look at this timeline of major ceasefires. What's so striking is how consistent the outcome is. From 2008 all the way up to recent years, you see the same words popping up again and again. Temporary, short-term, fragile. Every single time there's a pause in the immediate violence, but it's almost always followed by violations, new escalations, and just this constant simmering tension. The pattern is crystal clear.
So what this really tells us is that these ceasefires are basically just hitting the pause button. They consistently fail to build any kind of sustainable peace because they're only dealing with the symptom, the fighting itself, without ever getting to the root causes of the conflict. And that right there is the source of this long-term fragility.
So, to figure out why this keeps happening, our source material suggests we look at the problem through a totally different lens, an ancient peacemaking toolkit that comes from Islamic international law. Let's check out how this framework completely reimagines what a truce can actually be.
The whole toolkit is called Siyar. Now, Siyar is basically a body of principles from Islamic law that's all about governing international relations. It focuses on things like resolving conflict, justice, and maybe most importantly, the idea that you have to stick to your agreements. Think of this as the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about.
Okay, so the first tool in our kit is something called a hudna. Now, on the surface, this might look just like a regular ceasefire, but its purpose is completely different. It's not just a pause in the fighting, it is a strategic pause. It's deliberately designed to create the space needed to build trust, to allow for diplomacy, or to get critical humanitarian aid to people who need it.
And this is where that strategic part becomes so important. See, a hudna is never the end goal. It's always meant to be a step towards something much bigger. Sulh. And sulh is a permanent, comprehensive peace. Unlike a temporary truce, sulh is all about real reconciliation, because it aims to fix the root causes of the conflict. The two are designed to work hand in hand.
Next up, we have the ethical heart of this whole toolkit, maslaha. This is the guiding principle that says the public good, the welfare of the entire community, has to be the top priority in any decision. It's a powerful idea that insists peace agreements can't just be political deals. They have to actually serve the people who are caught in the middle of the conflict.
And finally, we've got the glue that holds this whole thing together, wafa bi al-ahd. It basically means fidelity to covenants. It's the absolute moral and strategic obligation to honor the agreements you make, because without it, trust is impossible, and no truce could ever lead to a lasting peace.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty good in theory, right? But does it actually work in the real world? Well, let's turn to a major historical example to see how this all comes together, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which our source presents as a total masterclass in applying these principles.
So way back in 628 CE, the Prophet Muhammad negotiated a 10-year truce with the Quraysh of Mecca. Now, the term seemed really disadvantageous at first, but look at the principles at play here. The negotiation was a hudna, a strategic pause, and it prioritized public welfare, or maslaha. The implementation required an incredible amount of strategic patience, but what it did was create a period of relative peace that allowed for dialogue and actually started to build some trust.
So the Treaty of Hudaybiyah gives us this really clear blueprint for success. It's built on three huge ideas. First, strategic patience, being willing to accept short-term compromises if it leads to a long-term gain. Second, having a long-term vision, seeing that temporary truce, the hudna, as just a stepping stone toward a permanent peace, or sulh. And third, an unwavering ethical commitment to the agreement itself, which is what builds the credibility you need to make any progress at all.
All right, let's take that ancient blueprint and bring it back to our modern case study. How do these principles from Siyar help us understand the challenges we see in Gaza?
This slide really puts it in stark contrast, doesn't it? The ideal hudna is a strategic stepping stone, but the reality in Gaza, as the source points out, is that ceasefires are usually just tactical pauses, totally disconnected from any long-term vision.
So instead of strengthening credibility, the repeated violations just keep eroding the trust that's so essential for making any real progress. You know, the role of mediators is absolutely critical here too. What we're seeing is that their effectiveness really boils down to two things: how neutral they're perceived to be and whether they can actually enforce the terms of the deal. So for example, Egypt might be great at brokering a deal, but they can't really enforce it. The UN is seen as neutral, but has very little power to enforce anything. It creates a situation where just getting an agreement signed is one thing, but making it actually stick is a whole other challenge.
And this brings us right back to that core principle of maslaha, public welfare, because the failure of these truces has an absolutely devastating human cost. Even when a ceasefire is technically supposed to be in effect, sporadic violations, people being forced from their homes, interruptions to electricity and water, for civilians, the crisis just keeps going. And from this perspective, any truce that doesn't put the public good first is fundamentally flawed from the start.
So what's the solution? How do we break this cycle of fragility and get to something that might actually last? Well, the source material proposes a framework built directly on these ancient principles. The proposed solution is all about applying these principles directly. It's about reframing ceasefires as a hudna. Remember, just one step in a much longer process. The goal is to move towards sulh, that lasting peace, by making public welfare, maslaha, central to every single deal, and then building trust by making sure agreements are actually honored, that wafa bil ahd. Ultimately, this is the core argument. The source concludes that lasting peace isn't going to come from quick political fixes. It requires a more principled approach that focuses on ethical commitment, public welfare, and the slow, incredibly difficult work of building trust over time. It's not about speed, it's about substance.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. In a world full of complex, modern conflicts, we're always looking for new, cutting-edge solutions. But what if the key to a more durable peace isn't in something new at all, but in understanding and applying the wisdom of the past? Could an ancient blueprint really be the answer? That's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us.